Good day. History is full of situations where kingdoms or countries sometimes go into a war or a conflict with each other, and one of the parties decides to call for outside help, maybe because they are part of an alliance, or maybe because they are close to the other person, or maybe because they incentivize the other country enough to come support them. But we've seen sometimes when such an invitation goes south, and the country that did the inviting ends up losing its sovereignty, even if it had won the war with the party that it invited. That was the situation that happened in India, where the Nawabs of India, different factions, were always at war with each other. And one had a smart idea of calling the British, then under the British company, East Indian Company. They went and met one enterprising young officer called Clive, Robert Clive, and they sought his support. And Clive helped them win the war. But winning became such a big drug for Clive that he ended up persecuting so many other wars against all the Rajs and all the Nawabs, and almost ultimately ended up conquering large territories of India and instituted British rule in India for over 200 years. He is known in history as Clive of India. The same too can be said for so many other countries. It's full in history. And that also happened to Europe. You see, the Germans under the Nazis were very powerful force. They were a powerful military force who defeated a large part of Europe very, very fast. It was only the British, because they were an island, that stood against them. So what did the British do? They went across the Atlantic and invited the Americans. Very reluctant to join the war. The Americans joined the war 2 years or so into the war when the Pearl Harbor was bombed, and some German submarines had the, let me say, bad idea of going to shoot down some American ships, merchant ships that were supplying Britain. That was an invitation, and that was the excuse that the Americans used in joining the war quite late. But the Americans, with their industrial power and their strength and their ability to manufacture, were a force the Germans couldn't cope with. And even at that time, by the time the Americans joined the war, the war in the East had changed in favor of the Soviets, and the Germans were having a very tough time in the Eastern Front. And the pressure of the Americans, resurgent Allied groups, and the Soviets made the Germans crack. Well, this is what has happened to the British, the Germans, and the French since that World War II. They lost practically their sovereignty. Europe has been under the occupation of the Americans for the past 80 years under the framework of NATO. Europe enjoys the military and nuclear umbrella of America under the framework of NATO. Germany was defanged. They were allowed to industrialize, but they did not have a military that you can call a powerful military. The Americans have been occupying Germany for 80 years now. The pretense is NATO. The French, though, have some form of sovereignty over their military arsenal. The British, too, because these were all strong, big empires before the arrival of the Americans. And one of the things that happened after the war was that the Americans cut them to size, made sure that they lost all the colonies they had, practically, especially those in Africa and South America and Asia. And they became very dependent on America for their financial systems, their manufacture. In fact, at the end of the war, America contributed 75% of all global manufacturing. Now, for the past 80 years, they've been under the orbit and influence of America in the frameworks like the G7. That invitation has made America suzerain over them for the past 80 years. Sometimes you have to be careful who you invite to come help you. When small countries find themselves around big countries, you will think that the leaders of the small countries will develop skills of good neighborliness. But it so turns out that history doesn't play that way. Sometimes they fall victim to the wheedling and the nice talk of the big countries from far that we can help you and support you. You make trouble and we'll come and help you. And unfortunately, that is what has happened to a country like Ukraine. They fell under the spell and under the allure of the Western promises. First EU, then later NATO. But they had a big neighbor around them, and they chose to go antagonize our big neighbor, while other neighbors, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, all the other countries of the Commonwealth of independent states who all came out of the Soviet Union chose a path of a better relationship with Russia. Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine chose a path of wanting to get close to Europe. They paid a big price for it. Good day. Welcome to my channel. My name is Ebimo Amungo, and this is Ebimo Amungo's perspective on global affairs. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe. If you have any comments regarding the opinions I express, please leave them in the comment section. There is a lot of news about President Zelensky of Ukraine. The most important one is that he has called for a ceasefire. It will be the first time that Zelensky will be calling for a ceasefire by himself, rather than the Russians, rather than Putin calling for a ceasefire. The reason being that in the past two times that, sorry, let me not misinform you, not a ceasefire, further discussions about a ceasefire. Let me not get it. Ukraine has been calling for unilateral ceasefire for the past 3, 4, 5 months, but it has not happened that way because they are on the back foot in the war with Russia. The support they once had from America has changed. They don't have that kind of support again. So they've been calling for unilateral ceasefire, but the Russians have said, let's have discussions while the war has been going on. And for two times, they've had meetings in Istanbul at the behest and at the instance of the Russians. This time around, it is Zelensky who is calling for another meeting because he had already said that these meetings in Istanbul weren't getting anywhere and he had stopped. But somehow, as the Russians had said, their negotiators are the soldiers on the war front, and those negotiators are making a strong point these days. They are circling the cities of Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk. They are getting close to sealing out all the big cities in the Donetsk region. They've already taken the city, practically everything in Luhansk. They are making progress in Sumy. They are moving in Volchansk. They are moving in the Zaporizhzhia region. They are moving. The march of the Russians is unrelenting. And just as this is happening, they are raining missiles and drones down on different cities at will with no intervention. And all the military facilities they can coordinate and locate within no place is safe for Ukraine in the whole Ukrainian country and territories and cities. Whether they are underground, whether they are in bunkers, military facilities are being blown up, infrastructure is being blown up, trains loading up, bringing materials to the front are being blown up, oil depots, refineries are being blown up. This is a time now that the Ukrainians have come to see the full brunt of the Russian army military escalating at a point nobody foresaw. And it's at this time that they don't have air defense. It's not as if they even had air defense, it would have helped. So the pressure on Zelensky, it's immense. And in the midst of this pressure, we are also reading now that America is plotting to remove Zelensky. Reports by Seymour Hersh says former General Valery Zuluzhny could step in amid declining support for the Ukrainian leader in Washington, D.C. I've already said it many times that Trump doesn't hide the fact that Zelensky is not his fan, and he's not a fan of the Ukrainians. That cause that has bipartisan support among so many American politicians is not one that is of interest to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is vengeful of what the Ukrainians did to him in his first term. I maintain that it is a human emotion and not a need for peace. The President Donald Trump has found a good way of pushing away people who want him to support Ukraine, and that's a lot of people. The neocons and all the congressmen, he has come up with a framework of peace. Let us have peace. But there are a lot of people who don't want peace. They want the war to continue with Russia. So now there's talk that President Trump is already now using the machinations of the CIA. We know what the CIA can do. We know how they do and enforce regime change along so many places. And now we are hearing, at least by Seymour Hersh's report, that Washington is actively planning on changing Zelensky. This is also happening at a time when Zelensky is thinking of a way out of everything, because Zelensky has become one of the greatest assets. The people who pushed him into this project, who are the ultranationalists in Kiev there, the people who some people call the Nazis, the Banda, right? They call them any other thing. But for them, they're Ukrainian nationalists. And because they're Ukrainian nationalists, they want to have their own Ukrainian identity and not be under the influence of Russian identity. But they pushed it a little bit too far when they started to tell that no Russian language in a country that has well over 25 to 40% of some parts of their country as Russian speaking. So now these ultranationalists are making sure that Zelensky continues to be in power as long as he can continue to get the goodwill of the West, and which is what he has been doing. Even though Donald Trump has not shown any love for Zelensky and the Ukrainian cause, it has not waned in the West. The Germans continue to support him, and they have already started the process of sending Patriot missiles. There's also Patriot missiles coming from so many other countries. But the plan by President Trump to help send more Patriot missiles using NATO has already got some pushback from some countries like France, Italy, and Czech Republic, who say they will not be part of that project. Even then, some countries are already sending their own Patriot missile batteries. Ukraine is not lacking in people who support her. And while this is going on, President Zelensky is trying to consolidate his hold. He has a political reality that he has to face. He has been running his government under martial law for the past year or so, since his tenure ended in May of 2024. So now he has had another round of martial law, extension of the martial law by 90 days. And then within this time frame, he is changing his government and consolidating it around him, people who are closer to him, and his political associate, Yermak, who is his chief of staff. So in doing this, he has reshuffled his government. And when he reshuffled his government, he sent his former minister of defense, Rostom Umerov, to Washington. Rostov Umerov is the one who has been negotiating with the Ukrainians, with the Russians in the past 2 cycles of Istanbul talks. But he has been sent to Washington, and the former Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, has now been appointed the new defense minister. He wants people closer to him, around him, who he knows have unbridled loyalty for him. He's plotting his continued stay, even if he's forced to have an election. Because the call for an election is a strong one, especially as it is something that is being insisted upon by the Putin administration in Russia. Putin says that even if they come to a peace agreement, they will not recognize Zelensky under the manner in which he is now to sign it, because they have to have presidential elections, and that's what they demand, that there must be a presidential election. So in the reality we find Ukraine now, Ukraine is losing territory very fast. They have lost their big support, but like I said, the support is not for Ukraine hasn't ended. Ukraine is a generous country. They are generously giving to the Europeans who have always had issues or fear or worries or hatred of the Russians. They've committed to a war where they provide the bodies and then the Europeans provide the diplomatic and political cover and also the material and material and monetary support. In the past week, the EU finally passed its 18th round of sanctions, this time trying to limit Russian oil to just $45 per barrel and putting sanctions on well over 200 ships who they consider to be part of the dark fleet or the fleet of countries, ships that the Russians use in bypassing sanctions. All this is not helping Ukraine. Ukraine is slipping away because Ukraine went and invited a big power from far off, made a mistake that so many other countries have made. And unfortunately, this time around, that partner and those partners are not winning the war. The collective strength of Ukraine, the NATO alliance, and the European Union alliance doesn't seem to be helping them in this war with Russia. Russia has come to be a force that nobody foresaw coming. That force has become one that has made those countries within the Caucasus and within a neighborhood to fear her the more. For a country like Turkmenistan, they are very grateful for the intervention the Russians did when there was demonstrations to try and remove them. But for Kyrgyzstan, a large country also, they are also trying to play their sovereignty well, and they play a game with the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans and the British business interests that have always wanted to be part of their reality, because Kazakhstan is very rich in oil also, but they are also very, very powerful as a logistic location. But all of them have come to realize that Russia is not the Russia that they should underestimate, as the Ukrainians have just done. One country that is feeling the full brunt of Russian anger recently for our actions against Russia is Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has been playing a game that somehow is seeming to almost want to undermine Russian power within that neighborhood. And Russia sent a strong message recently when two refineries in Ukraine, controlled by the Azerbaijanian oil company, state oil company, think Smok, Sosok, they were blown in Ukraine, blown up. They'd enjoy peace. Nobody had bothered them, and nobody had destroyed that infrastructure because they were under the. They all know. Everybody knew that there were investments owned by Aliyev family, but they were blown up, and a strong message was sent to Azerbaijan that be in line. Russia still has influence here because Azerbaijan has made itself a tool for a resurgence of Turkish influence and British and American influence within the Caucasus. And that is a region from which they are trying to undermine Iran from the north and Russia from the south. And this is a time now that Russia is growing in strength, has capacity, has a reach that is extensive, a reach made even more frightening by the powerful missiles, Zekon, Iskander, and all the other hypersonic missiles that they can just use, rain down on any country and any country's infrastructure within that neighborhood. They have drones, Giran 2 drones. They now are so much more powerful that their military production is frightening even to a country like China. But China is very well confident in itself. China and the countries of the Caucasus and the countries that neighbor um, Russia have come to see that they can form a partnership. And through Kyrgyzstan, through Turkmenistan, through these other countries, we now have pathways by which the Belt and Road Initiative is extending to new countries. It has extended to Iran. Rail line has been expanded to Iran, and through rail recently, goods got to Turkey. The Chinese are building extensive cooperation within that region. And already they have a framework under which they work, a military one called the SCO. Through that framework, military alliance, mainly an economic alliance, but also they support each other in a way that they are seeing the benefit of it. They are seeing the benefit of it. Besides the Belt and Road Initiative, all the countries of the East are coalescing together. And you will think that because the Russians are undergoing a lot of sanctions and all this rampage from the East, from the Europeans, that they are losing friends. No. Their sales of fertilizer has grown up. Their sales of wheat has grown. Their sale of oil has even grown. Their GDP is growing. And even recently, Japan started to buy Russian oil again for the first time in 3 years. Although they bought it just below the price cap of the last sanction regime, which was $60, they bought it at $57. But the ability of Russia to sell its oil is not been diminished. They have become established. They are forming stronger relationships with India and forming stronger relationship with China. And even then, they're also extending these relationships to Malaysia, to Indonesia. The diplomats of Russia are unrelenting. Every day they are on a plane. And just the other day, Sergei Lavrov was with Wang Yi in China, getting ready for, in Malaysia, getting ready for the upcoming 80th anniversary of the defeat of Japan by the Chinese. The 80th anniversary will be celebrated in Beijing, and Putin is expected to be there. The meetings are extending, the bonds of friendship is growing, and all the Eastern countries are coalescing together. It's creating a reality now where we see that there are actually two poles, the Western pole and the Eastern pole. The Western pole with the central node from which all the other neurons move up to, being China. And then the Western pole, which has America as its main node from which all the arteries into the Western countries of G7 all flow into. The Japanese are beginning to see that while they have extensive interest in America, it may just be that they should build a closer relationship with China. Because even them, despite their strong occupation over the past 80 years by the Americans and their extensive relationship and concessions to America, they are still being sanctioned very brutally by the new Trump administration and being treated not as allies. The same thing too for the Koreans. So, and the ASEANs already are the greatest trading partners of the Chinese. So the whole East is coming together, forming new corridors of trade, forming new corridors of logistics, the North-South corridor, and trying to integrate in a manner that will limit their need for the South, for the West. They're integrating in financial infrastructure like the chips, cross-border interbank payment systems led by the Chinese. They are using local currencies among themselves. They are slowly moving away and forming their own pole. And at the heart of it is this Russia-Chinese relationship that has become a big bulwark against NATO and the EU alliance. And this is where we are. Ukraine and the decision to go and call a big power to come and to help her in a war doesn't seem to have worked the way it has worked for many other people in history. It may just be a good thing for them. Because if this war finally ends, it may be that the Ukrainians may see the light as the Georgians saw the light after the invasion of Russia in 2008. They may just become, for their own best interest, quiet and start to learn to navigate great power politics the way countries like Bhutan, Nepal, Luxembourg, Albania, small countries who live within territories that are strong and big and powerful, have learned to navigate the slippery slopes of geopolitics without antagonizing their great neighbors. This is where I end my video for today. If you have any comment, please put them in the comment section. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe. And do well to like and share. Thank you very much. See you in my next video.